I am notorious for being weeding avoidant. I love planting gardens. I love arranging my flowers in the spring to figure out new ways to make our front garden pop with color, but man, once you start to have to weed, my enthusiasm starts to lag. A few summers ago, however, there was no avoiding the weeding, because in what felt like the start to some odd 1950s horror movie, Ben and I's garden was literally overtaken by weeds. We had a plot of land at a community garden near us that we had lovingly been tending for about a month when we ran up against some vacation time. So Ben's parents went out for us to water and take care of everything while we were gone. But when we returned, I cannot even truly begin to describe the carnage of our garden. You see, when we had originally planted our vegetables, we had gotten several bales of hay from a friend to place around the plants to help keep the water in and ideally some of the weeds out. However, little did we know that within that hay was some sort of something that looked an awful lot like kudzu, which over the course of time that we were gone just exploded all over our garden. We returned to these little tangles of weeds wound around all of our plants. So this wasn't just a matter of going around and uprooting weeds with abandon. This took time, diligent, patient time down in the dirt, carefully unwinding the weed tendrils from our plants. It took forever. But we got most of it out, except when it came to our squash and other veggies that also grow in tendril-like forms. It was nearly impossible to figure out where our actual plants ended and where the weeds began. And after hours and hours of working, we still had gotten nowhere. We tried for weeks to try and get a handle on our tiny tendrils, but in the end became a bit of a lost cause. We were spending so much time weeding that the rest of our tending was falling short. And so we just had to let our squash go where it would and see if it would produce amidst the chaos. Didn't always have the best results, but it worked. And I'll be honest, I was happy to no longer have to unwind those tiny tendrils anymore. Now, if you take our parable this morning at face value, it would almost seem like Jesus is giving us a divine reprieve on ever having to weed again. Kind of sounds like Jesus is saying that our decision to stop wasting our time pulling out kudzu-like weeds was the right decision. So, if you want, you can take our gospel today, and whenever your spouse or parents tell you to go out and weed the flower beds, you can just say, Jesus says I don't have to. But that would really be missing the whole point of what is actually going on this morning. Jesus is continuing on in this farming vein this morning, but yet again, Jesus presents us with a farmer who doesn't really seem like he's making the best decisions. I mean, he starts out great. This is a farmer who knows what he's doing. He goes out with good seed, plants it in good soil, and all seems to be well. Until his plants start to come in, and just like that kudzu in our garden, it seems that his good seed has been overtaken by weeds. It seems like there are so many weeds that it's almost hard to distinguish the wheat from them, what was good seed and what was not meant to be planted. Now this is where the not so great farming decisions come in. His slaves come in and first and foremost try to figure out if the farmer screwed something up when he initially planted. They think he's the cause of the weeds because clearly if they've taken over like this, he did something wrong, planted the wrong seed. But alas, he tells them that isn't the case. So they ask the logical question, do you want us to go out and weed? The intelligent, smart, logical answer here is yes, go pull the weeds and make sure they don't harm the good seeds anymore. Clear the fields and make sure that all of those weeds are gone. However, just like last week, we don't get a logical, intelligent, farm-smart answer. Instead, the farmer tells them to leave the weeds. He tells them that if they go out and start pulling up weeds, they run the risk of pulling up the wheat as well. So it's better to leave them be. Let them grow together. And then when the harvest arrives, they'll be able to separate out the wheat from the weeds. You can imagine Jesus' audience hearing this parable. As farmers themselves, they would envision walking by fields that were strewn with weeds and wheat alike, growing so thick that you can't distinguish which is which. You can imagine sidelong glances and shrugs of the shoulders. I guess they decided to let the crop go this year. Or, man, can you believe how far behind he is on his field work? Or look at all those weeds. You'd think he didn't care about his harvest. To their agriculturally inclined ears, this parable yet again sounds like one of the craziest things you could suggest when it comes to farming. And yet it isn't. For Jesus, those weeds, that wheat, they are so much more than simple plants. They are us. They are the world we live in, and they are a vital lesson in how we, as children of the kingdom, should live in and amongst each other. We have a tendency to think that we know each other, know the world with absolute certainty, that we see everything with crystal clear clarity, and because of that, we're capable of making logical judgments to draw perfect conclusions and assess how the world should work. We look around at the world we live in, at our brothers and sisters on this journey, and we are 100% certain that we know who the weeds are in the field. We know the people that make things difficult. We know what evil is. We know what we should uproot and throw away, banish into bundles to be burned. We look out at the field that is this world and we say, let me at those weeds, because certainly we can make this field clear. We can make it better. We can root out the things that need to disappear. This is our job. Let us take care of it. It is into that certainty, that clarity, that Jesus steps and says, hold on a second. That isn't your job, actually. That's my job, and mine alone. Because for as much as we know how the world works, we know how our hearts work too, don't we? We know that we look around at our brothers and sisters, and our gut judgments are what push us towards branding them a weed or a wheat, ready to either be plucked out of the earth and thrown away or allowed to stay. Far too often our hearts are inclined towards judgment that is incapable of freeing itself from prejudice and conclusions that were jumped too far too soon. We think we know what evil is and what is best for this world and what weeds are to be pulled, until we realize that how we feel might be entirely different from how someone else feels. We look at this world and we don't see weeds objectively. Instead, we see weeds that are based on another's religion. We think we know who evil is and why they're evil, and think for certain that those are the people that should be plucked. We see weeds based on political party, based on who we think someone else might have voted for, or what policies they support, or what their stance is on one little thing, and we say, because of that, you need to be out of the field. We are ready to pull people out of this field for any number of reasons that have way more to do with us and our hearts than with them. We're ready to pull people from the field because of their race, because of their gender, because of their sexual orientation, the way they've set up their homes, the decisions they've made, their economic status, the way they dress, the way they talk, how much education they have. The list could go on and on and on, until suddenly we've pulled so many weeds that there's nothing left in the field, and everything is uprooted and destroyed. And therein lies the heart of what Jesus is trying to say this morning. When it comes to weeding, we humans will always get it wrong. We will always be influenced by bias and prejudice and things that we don't even realize are pushing and pulling our hearts in one direction or another. And without fail, none of us will ever think that we might be a weed. After all, we know what weeds look like, don't we? And they certainly don't look like us. We never stop to think that all of those things that have caused our hearts to judge and brand other people as other, as deserving of a place in the kingdom, a place in the field, might just be tiny weeds growing in our own hearts. We never stop to think about the fact that by spending all of our time worrying about who Jesus might be letting grow and thrive in the field around us, that we might be weakening our own roots every single day. We never stop to think about the fact that by seeking to uproot others, we uproot our own hearts too. When we spend so much time seeking out weeds and trying to clear the fields, we harm ourselves just as much. We harm our hearts and our connection with Christ and our hope and our faith. We let our hearts get so caught up with how we think Christ sees the world that we completely lose sight of the gospel and how Christ actually does see the world with hope and compassion and love and optimism, not with judgment and prejudice and fear and animosity. At the heart of this gospel lies one simple question. On what will we focus our hearts and minds? Will we focus them on getting rid of all those weeds we think deserve to be gotten rid of, or do we focus on being good seed, focusing on growing in faith and compassion and hope? Do we spend all of our time weeding so wildly that we end up destroying the garden, or do we focus on the garden as a whole? What is best for everything that God has planted? Do we decide that even though we're the seed, we need to be the gardener too? Or do we let our grip on those supposed weeds relax and say, maybe I should leave this to Jesus? Do we choose to uproot everything around us for the sake of one tangled weed, or do we take a step back and decide to grow together? Do we trust ourselves, or do we finally decide to trust the gardener, crazy as he may seem? Amen.